Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 8 from the 2016 World Chess Championship match between our current champion Magnus Carlsen, playing on the white end, and challenger Sergey Karjakin. 7 games in, 7 draws. Let's see what would happen in Game 8. Carlsen opens with d4, the second d4 by him in the match. We saw this in Game 1. Where he played the offbeat Trumpovsky with bishop g5 in game 1, but in this game it's knight f3, d5, and now another surprise, e3, heading for a Colle. This is an opening that you're more likely to see at the club level rather than the top level. Well, we got to see this in Game 8, the Colle played in Game 8 of this championship. Let's see how play develops. e6, bishop d3, c5, and b3. Preparing to fianchetto, shutting down any kick of the bishop with c4. Bishop e7, both sides are now castled. White fianchettos, black prepares to do similar, and is in a position to potentially recapture on c5 with a pawn. D takes c follows. Black does not take with the pawn. Bishop takes instead. This is just a matter of taste. Black could very well take with the pawn here, and, well, would have to be content with playing this position type where black is working with a hanging pawn structure, quite a dynamic position, a volatile position, one that is subject to change still. d4, c4, not a path black goes down. Instead, it's bishop takes, so black won't have to play with some hanging pawn structure. Knight b to d2. You definitely want to stay out of the c-pawn's way. He wants to potentially strike at d5. Not the only way to strike at this point, by the way. After bishop b7, queen e2. So staying quite flexible, not yet showing, Carlsen is not quite showing his hand. Maybe it's e4, maybe it's c4. Knight b to d7. c4 it is in the game. We're just a moment away from having a completely symmetrical pawn structure. And that's what happens. D takes c, knight takes c. Each pawn opposite from one another. a2, a7, b3, b6, etc. Same story on the king side. Queen e7, and quite a symmetrical position aside from what's happening on the d file. Right? The knights are opposite from one another, the queens, the bishops. What's different? It's these pieces. The king bishop and the queen knights are different. Let's see what follows. a3. Black needs to prevent b4. There isn't a good square for the bishop. He could be taken out if he goes to d6. So a5 it is. So this stops b4, but the give and take here, pros and cons, stops b4, but weakens b5. So, white hops to it, trying to take advantage of that weakened square with the knight. Knight d4 it is. Getting the rooks involved now. There's also a new square for the knight. Both sets of rooks are now in play. It's tough to find a single piece in this position that does not stand well. All pieces are functioning quite well for both sides. Knight f8. Where is he headed? g6, but where is he headed from there? h4. This needs to be addressed because once he hits at h4, he is converging on g2 with the bishop. There is some possible sacrifices right around the corner. We have both black knights approaching the white king. Both bishops, as it stands right now, are pointing at the king side, and soon the knights can be helping out as well. how does white cope with this? Is it time to make a pawn move on the king side? No. Queen to e1. White prepares to defend g2 how? With the bishop. Bishop f1 on this move 18. Knight g4. Now, why would he go here? He could be kicked with h3. Well, his idea is to play into e5. It's interesting to see that in this game, this knight was allowed to stay in white's territory for some time. Now, suppose white plays h3. This knight would be fine with playing into e5. And notice what he would be doing from e5. He's trying to eliminate one of the two necessary defenders of a3. Without the knight on c4, a3 will be picked up. Have this battery pointed at a3. White does not kick the knight to the e5 square, but I'd like to just show you an interesting variation that comes from h3, something that could come about, a tactic that feels like it's out of nowhere. h3, if it was played, and knight e5 was the reply. Let's have a look at the move knight to b5 for just one moment. Knight b5, we can say, helps to defend the a3 pawn. Notice this cool tactical shot by black, namely knight f3, a piece that must be captured. Pawn takes, and then knight h4 could follow. Knight on the rim is not dim in this case, a very strong piece looking to land a fork. And in the computer's eyes, the best defense is to devote a piece to defending that pawn. Trying to defend with the bishop, well, here now would follow queen g5, threatening mate. You could only defend it by playing queen f1, and then there's knight here. Or excuse me, bishop takes f3, and then this is collapsing. This is game over. Just wanted to highlight, again, these squares are being observed by the bishop and can soon be observed by that knight on h4. It's a super strong knight from this square. Ties in very well with that sniper on b7. This knight was not kicked. As mentioned, he was allowed to stay in white's house for some time. Knight b5 straight away. Bishop c6. Another move was queen to g5, having another piece enter the attack, placing her opposite the king, but that does give up some control of d6. So I believe one of the ideas that white has in mind with bishop to c6 is to try and shoo him away, and if he retreats, then maybe the queen would be a little bit more comfortable leaving control of d6. But this knight doesn't budge. a4 instead. And it's important that he doesn't budge. For example, if he drops back to c3, we can have queen to c7. Notice the square that is no longer under control. h2 is struck at from a diagonal, which means white will have to make some serious concession to defend against mate. This is not defending against mate. g3 would, but g3 opens up this bishop's eyes to some new possibilities. f3, h1, g2. Some serious weaknesses, something you do not want to do with the bishop on that main diagonal. Or even if it wasn't on the main diagonal, you wouldn't want to weaken your light squares like this. So the knight should not move. The knight does not move. a4 in the game. Bishop d5. Bishop to d4. Equal position. Bishop takes pawn, rook takes. Bishop takes, rook on d takes. Getting some exchanges in here also. Now we're maybe seeing some point in, we're seeing a point to, let's say, why was white not playing h3? Well, maybe now there's a valuable tempo being gained by white, is there not? Notice after these captures on the fourth rank, there's some punch being thrown at the knight. He is unprotected. So white is giving some direction here to Team Black. One rook is exchanged, and I thought at this point, why not take with the bishop? I mean, would you really want to damage your structure? I was thinking right around this point, you either exchange rooks and then capture with the bishop, or you capture like this. But in the game, it was none of the above. In the game, it was b takes rook. And this is something you have to, you have to reassess this position, reevaluate this position. Why would white do this to his pawn structure? There's now split pawns instead of A, B, it's now A, C. They are split, they're isolated. Why would you want to do this? Well, let's see what white has in mind. After knight F6, queen D2, white is putting pressure on the rook, and now we have rook to B8, which is a top move, one of the top moves by the engine. If rook takes rook, now white would have two pawns here, and this is an interesting position. At some point, one of these two can turn past. With the right kind of support, one of them can turn past. So this is really the idea white had by capturing with the pawn on this move 24, and that is to maintain control over this D file, to follow up with D2, and know rook takes rook can be met with the forming of a pawn duo. Okay, so white is gaining control over the, we can say, the only opened file. Notice how this capture is influencing the control over the D file now. Black doesn't want to allow that pawn duo to be formed, so instead moves the rook out of the way. It's a little bit odd to see this, but yeah, it's going from an open file to one that is not open, one where he's just staring at his own pawn, but at least he is defending something that was unprotected and staying out of the way of, let's say, a timely knight to D6 move. You know, if he was on C8 instead of B8, the knight D6 move can hit with a tempo. So rook to B8 it is. G3, flight square. The bishop is ready to contribute as well, get on the long diagonal. Knight E5, bishop G2, basically played in an instant. Long diagonal prevents knight F3. Now we have a flight square in there for black. And white gets on with a forcing line, pushing with F4 straight away. I thought H3 was something more natural, having a new square for the king on H2, and maybe even going about play with G4, and only later F4. F4 is the more committal of these three moves, of these three pawn advances. It's quite weakening to the king. Playing F4. I was preferring to see this H3 move and only then king to H2, but F4 straight away, dictating play. The knight has to make a decision. It's one of these two. For the moment now that he's on D7, the queen cannot see A7, so the knight is able to hop to that square. And I believe in game 1, we saw this similar journey with the knight. Getting to A7 and then going into C6. That's what happens in this game. Queen A3. Queen is now getting very active. Pressure on A4, within checking distance in multiple ways. Maybe E3, maybe A1. So what would happen if white gave up the rook in order to get the two minor pieces, the two knights? Well, queen E3, grabbing a pawn with check. You can't go to the corner. That would lead to mate. And so you would have to go to F1. Queen C1 can follow. Queen takes C can follow. And yeah, this is a little bit of a shaky king position. Again, I would have rathered have the king on H2, so you're not having to cope with all these queen checks and such. It's an even position in the computer's eyes. We don't have this, though. Rook takes knight was not played. Instead, knight c6. He is defended by the bishop. He's throwing a punch at the rook, who tucks himself away. The king is now there to defend. And how is white going to deal with the pressure on a4? It's hit once. How to defend it? He's not. He's now producing a new square for the king. Prepared to tuck away. Also take note of the times. They are rough times, but they give us some idea of where the players are, still needing 9 more moves to meet time control. So h3 is played. Knight c5, getting out of the line of fire, and now an additional piece is put on the a4 square. King h2. Knight takes a. Black is up a pawn, and that's just not any pawn. Black now has a passed a pawn. How will white combat this? Where is the compensation? Rook d8. Looking to maybe exchange rooks, have the queen enter, and maybe target f7. g6. This is a more, let's say, a better square for the king. He will be around to secure f7 now, in case he is flushed off of the back rank. He can step up here, and he's closer to the base point f7. Queen d4. The knight is under fire. Where is he going? Nowhere. Black walks into a self-pin. King to g6, or excuse me, king to g7. Is he overloaded? Not quite. He's defending the knight and the rook, but so too is the queen. c5 is a mistake. Well, a blunder in time pressure. I'm not sure what exactly Carlsen missed, but c5 is a blunder. I guess one of the ideas was to cut off the connection between the queen and rook. White with this move is preparing to take the rook, and after king takes, queen takes knight. But black can simply take the rook first, so I don't know what exactly was missed. But yes, in time pressure, anything can happen. Both players, some mutual time pressure right around this point. This is now close to an advantage of -2. Nearly a 2-pawn advantage for black. Knight takes rook follows. Knight takes pawn. Black still with the advantage. Queen to d6. White is looking to target the only weakness in black's position, namely f7. We're just a few moves away from time control. Black now plays queen d3 and throws the advantage away. This is another blunder. They often happen in pairs. Well, wasn't exactly back-to-back mistakes, but very close to one another. Did we have 2 blunders? Not sure exactly if that's the correct term, but yes, the significant advantage was thrown Karjakin's way when playing c5, and then that advantage was thrown away after queen to d3. Why exactly? Because of the shot knight takes e6. And that was the move that Carlsen found just before time control on this move 38. A better move to maintain the advantage and almost a certain win would have been queen a4. Preparing to drop back and defend the only weak point, namely f7. If queen here, queen d7. Both players would meet time control, and with these 2 pawns, black can win this without any issue. However, he didn't find this. Queen d3 instead, and now we have knight takes e6, taking advantage of the fact that knight takes knight is not possible. He has a very important responsibility to defend the queen. So, you can't take with the knight, you must take with the pawn. But now, this king is exposed, and it allows some checks We do have queen e7, king to g8. There goes the knight, and right around the corner, there's possibilities for capturing on g6 with check, and perpetual checks with an open king, a queen around. They are not long off. Let's see how play follows. Black sets the a pawn in motion. That is the furthest advanced pawn. That is a passed pawn. e4 follows. Okay, so the queen isn't there to defend g6 anymore. Queen d7 follows. Queen takes pawn check. Queen g7 blocks. Queen to e8 check. Queen to f8. And, yep, by this time they've gone past move 40, so there's plenty of time to think this one through. Carlsen decides to not go in for queen to g6. Now, I'm not quite sure if we would have had repetition at this point right here. If queen g6 was played, I don't know if Karjakin would have played queen g7 or maybe king to h8. Maybe Carlsen thought queen g6 would be met with king to h8 and the queen would be a little bit out of play. I can't know that for certain, of course. It could have been the case where black would have been content with some type of repetition, but Carlsen is going for maybe more. He plays on this move 44, queen to c6, eyeing up the b6 pawn, maintaining pressure on e6. How to defend? Queen to d8. This game goes on. It's almost like we had, in this game 8 experience, 2 games wrapped into one. There was the game before move 40 and the one after. In this endgame, where it is queen knight versus queen bishop, who stands better? How are we doing material-wise? Forget about it. Material is not nearly as important as piece activity still. We have a bishop on g2 that is not yet playing, so white tries to get him playing with f5. What white would like to see here is e takes f, e takes f. Now the bishop at least has a couple possibilities, maybe more. But these would seem to be, these two highlighted squares would seem to be the two most important squares for the bishop. But black doesn't capture. Black does not help the bishop by capturing on f5. Instead, continues to push that passed pawn, a3. F takes e, and now king to g7. Why would black do this? Well, suppose a2 instead of the game move king to g7. Let's see how play would follow. Black will lose their a pawn if they push it to a2. How? e7. You have to take this pawn, otherwise white is going to queen. Queen takes pawn. Now the king is exposed to a rank check, a timely fork, and the pawn will be picked up. He's come so far. He was only a step away, but he will be hunted down. Therefore, king g7 sidesteps this idea of e7 with a follow-up queen a8 move because it would no longer be hitting with check. There would no longer be this fork on the king and a pawn. So what is white to do now? Still pushes with e7. Queen takes pawn. He's now no longer as secure. There isn't a pawn around to defend him, so the queen will have a responsibility. Black is also down a pawn now. But this guy certainly has a great value, only 2 steps away from queening. Knight d3. The queen is there to defend. Where is this knight headed? Queen a5, queen c5, queen a6, knight e5. Again, let's take note. White is up a pawn, but this bishop is not playing. It's a tall pawn on g2. And what is this king doing? He's not going to help out. These pawns are not going to bother Team Black anytime soon. The big question here is, can white hold this position? This isn't one this isn't a position where if Karjakin offered a draw that Carlsen would decline it. No. This is one where black is still trying to win here, even though he is down a pawn. How can black successfully push through this a-pawn is the big question. Let's see. Queen to e6 was a serious blunder. This allows black to now play a top move. Top reply here is h5. Now, in a way, this is putting white in Zugzwang. Regardless of what white's next move is, there's some serious concession that is made. For example, if we just consider some bishop move, like bishop to f1, why is this no good? It would allow queen f2 check, bishop g2. Well, let me point out this one first. On queen f2, king h1, there would be queen takes bishop, and knight f3 mate. These are a fantastic combination of pieces to work with. A great attacking force is a queen and knight. Once more, if bishop f1, queen f2, some other variation like bishop block runs into check, taking advantage of the pin, and then mate. My point here, a bishop move would be no good. A pawn move would only weaken the king position. A queen move, suppose queen a6, what would black do here? Black can follow with queen c3, and what's going to happen is the checks run out. Let me add that when h5 is played, on this move 51, when h5 is played, one of the interesting ideas is to produce a new square for the king. Why am I drawing some attention to this? Well, after queen a6, suppose queen to a6 is played in this position, queen c3, queen check, king h6. If white insists on giving these checks, well, the knight can now play here, and he does a very good job at preventing ensuing checks. Black will go on to win this position, being able to play queen to b2 and then escort this pawn to the a1 square. There's not a good continuation here. If I'm to take it out just a few more moves, it does get a little bit complicated. First e5, computer points out h4, converging on g3. G takes h4, queen takes e5 check. There goes that pawn. One of the ideas behind e5 was to free up the bishop. King h1, queen a1, king back to h2. Now we have a2, bishop f3, queen b2 check, king g1, and black is able to push through and promote. If the king stepped up, we can still go ahead and promote here. One other line would actually be bishop here to try and take advantage of the knight. This would allow check, king g2, and queen takes bishop. Some other line, king to g1, you could just promote straight away. It's definitely a little bit complicated here, but the main idea with this h5 move is, in some cases, the king can play to h6, and then the knight can be a super defender for the king, playing to g6. And that will buy black some time to have the queen help support that pawn's advance. Now, in the game, in reply to h5, we had the move h4. This is move 52, and after black's move 52, a2, Carlsen resigned. We had our first decisive game in this match. Why exactly did Carlsen resign? Let's look at the obvious. Why not? Queen takes pawn. what's the issue? Well, knight g4 check. Where does he go? He only has two options. King h1 allows queen check and mate. The other option after knight g4, king h3, allows queen g1, preparing mate on h2. How do you defend this? You can give a check. Not here. The queen has that covered. Here, yes, but after king g6, where is that next check? It's not available. No good checks by the white queen here. Everything is covered, and again, how are you defending mate on h2? You'd have to move your bishop, but this would allow knight f2, and you'd have to give up your queen to stop mate. One last line is queen a6. Black can follow up with queen d4. A small improvement with the queen, still keeping a close eye on a7, preparing to simply advance. And we would have, of course, a similar idea, a similar continuation if queen takes pawn in this case, kicking off with knight g4. And one last line. After queen d4, if white gives a check, black can simply block with the knight. There is no perpetual check in this case. Knight f7, black promotes next. Again, after a2, Carlsen resigned. The first decisive game in this match, and Karjakin did it with the black pieces. Wow. What an intense match we have here. Things got a whole lot more interesting after this game 8. A rest day, and then game 9 picks up. Now, let's have a look at the tail of the tape real quick, and let me add a few notes here that you may find interesting. First off, a correction from the Game 7 video. I said that if it goes into tie breaks, that the rapid time control games would be 15 minutes with the 10-second increment. I need to correct myself. It's actually 25 minutes with a 10-second increment. Also, will it even go into tie breaks now that someone has scored a point? We'll see how these 12 games play out. Still a couple more whites for Carlsen to try his luck with. And here's the evaluation, pretty even. We have a little issue with knight b5 that was not taken advantage of. A little bit of a blunder, a big blunder, just before time control, move 40. But Karjakin gave it back, and then pretty much game 2 within this second game within game 8, we had another serious blunder, queen to e6. And that was a blunder that Carlsen could not recover from. Took advantage of it. Karjakin took advantage of it quite well and converted it nicely with a2, and we didn't see any moves beyond that. After all was said and done, 3 inaccuracies, 2 mistakes, 1 blunder by Carlsen with an average centipawn loss of 29. On Karjakin's end, 1 inaccuracy, 2 mistakes, no blunders, with a 15 average centipawn loss. Yes, things definitely got quite interesting. In fact, after the game, a quick note that Carlsen was at the press conference waiting, I guess, for Karjakin to arrive, and he all of a sudden got up and left in frustration, and in the end wasn't there for the press conference. So definitely a very frustrated Carlsen after this Game 8 loss. He will most likely incur a fine for not showing up for the press conference, not carrying through with that. There's something like a 5% fine by both the organizer and FIDE. So in the end, I guess, whatever his earnings are at the end of this championship, whether he turns out to be the loser, he'd have to be forking over $44,000 of his prize money, or if he turns out to be the winner, if he had 60% of the pie, it would be something like $66,000. So yeah, he's most likely going to have some type of fine. A lot of interesting stuff is happening after this game 8, so it's very interesting, and we're going to see how it all plays out. Have I left out anything more? I don't think so. Yeah, there was a lot going on. This was, without question, the most action-packed game of the match. You could probably hear it in my voice. It's getting worn. I need to rest it. These guys need to rest. We'll see if Carlsen is able to rest. And we'll see how it all plays out. As it stands right now, 4.5 for the challenger, Karjakin. And Carlsen still sitting at 3.5 in this race to 6.5 points. Will he be dethroned? As usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below, and we will see how it all unravels. That is all for now. Take care. Bye.